Hello and welcome to the Idifico Insights podcast. I am very excited today to have Calandra Cruickshank with us. Calandra is the founder and CEO of Playbook International, which is a tech company dedicated to simplifying complex data to deliver actionable analytics for strategic decision making in the real estate, climate, and health sectors. That's a mouthful. Welcome, Calandra. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks so much, Mandy. Great to be with you.
Yeah, this is exciting. Okay, so tell us all about your background. You came from journalism and then eventually moved into being a tech founder. So take us through that journey.
Yeah, started in journalism, inspired by my grandfather, who was the voice of America on the radio for Brazil.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I think from the time I could talk, I was sort of rooted in that direction. And when I was probably in my late teens or somewhere in there, I reconnected with a cousin of mine who was a serial entrepreneur in the food industry.
Oh, interesting.
And together we did two companies that were sort of for benefit companies when that was a very new idea. So we were for profit to benefit nonprofits. And we did two companies together. The first one was done as a project in partnership with the Women's Funding Network to benefit women and families in poverty and climate change. So it had kind of this dual holistic purpose.
Wonderful.
And the second one was an online coupon company. And so we kind of transformed that industry from just paper coupons, and it was already moving digital, but we took it from a situation where when somebody clips a coupon online, the brand gets, there's like a transaction there, but we changed it to be when they actually use the coupon in the store. And through our platform, people could come in, clip their coupons for groceries or air travel or food or whatever, and then pick their favorite nonprofit. So nonprofits made money, brands drove traffic and sales, and people saved money. And it was right in that 2008 recession, so it was perfect timing.
Yeah.
And from those experiences, I developed the business sense, I guess, to really understand how to build companies, how to scale, how to take an existing model and turn it into something new. And that helped in what I ended up doing with Playbook.
All right. So would you consider yourself a serial entrepreneur at this point also?
I guess I would consider myself on the road to being one.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. I identify with that also. Not too many companies, but certainly have a streak in me that likes to start things for sure. Yeah. I'm with you. Okay. So tell us about Playbook.
So Playbook, it's been a very interesting journey, and I think that coming into Playbook from a journalism background, actually through journalism I learned to listen, research, gather information from all different perspectives, right? And then summarize it into an objective, in that case article, that was accessible to a large audience, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I think with Playbook, really, when I first identified the gap that Playbook fills, it was because I had met a gentleman who was 35 years at the time in commercial real estate, and he was very frustrated that every time a company came to their office to move a headquarters or open a new manufacturing facility, that kind of thing, it took them weeks or months to do the research to figure out which communities had the best workforce, taxes, infrastructure, etc., to support the business. And they also were very frustrated that they only could aggregate data for the top 50 markets kind of thing, because the data was so complex and so forth. And so we really, initially, I kind of honestly, I was like, oh, he's such a troglodyte. He just doesn't know where to look online. You can get data for anything online. And as I started researching it, and I realized that he was right. There was nowhere online that was aggregating all of this data that was required for this type of decision making. Second of all, he had like through their business, they would go to the economic development organizations and say, hey, can you give us the data? We've identified at a high level that you might be a fit. Give us the data for your community so we can analyze it. And as I started talking to economic development organizations, I realized that they also often didn't have the data for their own community, right? And so I realized there was an opportunity. And I also started to recognize the size of the market, right? Initially, real estate, which is such a huge market.
Right.
And then I was very intrigued. So, just really out of curiosity, my own curiosity, I started putting together a business plan and I started running it past him to say, you're really onto something here. And if I were you, I would build a company around this. And he thought it was brilliant and was like, I really just did it for fun. And he said, well, he offered to partner on it and provide the seed funding. So that's really how it started. And, I think today Statebook continues to evolve far. I mean, you mentioned health, right? It also has insurance applications and finance and transportation and energy. We're constantly evolving the platform, the data aggregation, and what started as a SaaS platform for Fortune 500 companies to do site selection, decision making, and economic development organizations to position themselves and access all of the data that they needed to attract those businesses, right? It's evolved dramatically past just the SaaS platform into being accessible to different types of industries, because every industry uses the same data. It's just combined in different ways for different insights for specific industries. And so I think during COVID, we also developed APIs of our data so that we could license it to other companies, tech companies that need to provide like speed to insights, we like to call it, for their customers.
It's so cool. And you have a patent.
We do, yeah, because, I think coming into economic development and corporate site selection, having no background in that was actually kind of a secret strength.
Yeah.
Because in every industry, people make assumptions on what is and isn't possible, right? And they've been doing things a certain way for so long that they don't always see outside the forest through the trees kind of thing. So I think coming into the industry, it was assumed that nobody could aggregate this data for complex decision making, right? And the federal government hadn't done it. IBM tried to do it they had a site selection arm consulting group, and they tried to do it and couldn't do it. So it was just sort of assumed that, it couldn't be done. And I think because we were outside of the industry and didn't have any of these preconceptions,
right,
we were able to look at the problem with a fresh perspective and leverage new technologies for aggregating and mapping and visualizing data and create something new that solved a lot of issues. So we have a patent for how we aggregate the data and make it accessible and useful to our customers. And the fact that we're able to normalize over 50 plus federal sources plus third-party, private, and nonprofit sources and normalize the data across the entire U.S. down to the census tract and block group level. It's an incredible feat, especially when 50% of the census tracts can change in any given year. Trending across changing geographies, dirty, messy data that comes in as just codes, and then we transform it into actionable insights. It is quite a feat, and we often get, oh, you're just aggregating publicly available data. Why would I pay you for that? And we always say, okay, we'll see you in 6 months. As you try to normalize across these complex data systems, across all of these things, and then update it and figure out how to trend over years and things like that, when everything is changing with every update, it's very complex.
Totally. So I'm wondering, I want to talk about what it means to be a tech founder or a non-tech founder. Because as you know, I also am founding a tech company, but I don't have a degree in CS, right? Computer science. I don't know know if we just need a new way to like describe this, because I mean, it's not like I'm offended by it when someone would say you're a non-technical founder, but I mean, everything you're describing is very technical. I mean, it's in a language everyone can understand, but would you identify as a tech founder at this point?
So I think I would identify as being a tech founder. That doesn't mean I have the skills, the technical skills, right? Like I can't write code.
Right.
I can't
Right.
even read code, So, but I think you don't have to be on that end of it to understand and identify a gap or a need and be smart enough and humble enough to hire people smarter than you to be able to build the technology, right? But it takes somebody with the vision to understand what needs to be built and then to be able to hire the people that can actually build it and share the vision and the passion for what you're trying to accomplish. So in my case, initially we outsourced the tech. And we actually went through 2 iterations because we hired a company that had won all of these awards in GIS mapping and data aggregation and stuff in New York. And after the first like 6 months and $1,000 or more, we realized that they were not building what we needed and we had to let them go. And I brought in all kinds of experts to look at the code that they had written and realized we had to scrap the entire thing. There was nothing we could reuse. So that was a very painful lesson as a non-technical founder.
Yeah.
And then we ended up hiring another team out of New Orleans that specialized in building government tech systems. And they had never done anything like what we were looking to do, but they definitely had the skills to do it. And they built us a great platform. And, I had to go out to New Orleans once a month for a year to work with the team. And I was like, this is so hard. Not actually, it was so wonderful to be able to go there every month. But, they built us a great platform, but truly, I think going back to my earlier comments, like being a non-technical founder and understanding the market and being able to listen to what was actually needed in that market. And then I literally I did a PowerPoint with very detailed specs framing out everything I needed this platform to do visually and everything. And then they built to those specs. And initially, our platform actually looked like the PowerPoint.
Okay.
So, we had to then like do some UX UI to make it what it is today. But, I really think that, well, and to follow on to that, we then, like 3 years in, we brought in our own in-house tech team, and from there we've scaled everything, the platform, the APIs, the data itself exponentially. So again, I think it's just, you don't have to be technical, you have to have a vision and you have to be smart enough, and really humility is everything to be able to hire people smarter than you that can actually build the thing. So my CTO is amazing. My chief economist has been with us from day one, and he manages all of the data side of it. And also, I like to say his brain operates in the cloud, because no matter what topic you bring up, he knows all about it and the data that could be put around it and can be framed up. So, it's really, I don't think you have to be technical to be a tech founder.
But I do think you're extremely smart and on the same level as all the rest of them, especially because I think you can teach us about the word troglodyte.
Troglodyte.
Is that what you said? I don't know this word.
It's just somebody who's sort of in the past and doesn't know how to do certain things, like it isn't up on current, tech or trends or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I hadn't heard it, so yeah, I wrote it down.
Fun word.
Cool. I know, and as someone who I pride myself on, knowing language, right? Like that would be an area that I feel pretty smart in too, but that's awesome. Okay, so as we think about the smaller communities and then the big communities and how Statebook sort of levels the playing field for them, explain how it does that.
Yeah. So, Statebook aggregates data for workforce, taxes, infrastructure, supply chain, quality of life, education, health, housing, transportation, energy, NOAA weather data, FEMA National Risk Index, like all kinds of things. We're still to this day the most holistic view that you can get on a community. And these communities, large cities, right, and some well funded states tend to have their own research organization, right? They have their own research team in house that aggregates data and does, some manipulation and visualization. Some are more sophisticated than others. Smaller communities and underfunded states do not have those. So they don't have access to the data. They rely on sometimes a university or the federal government or something to try to get the data, which always creates a bottleneck, right? And so they don't have access to the data. And what that means is that they kind of really struggle for access to comprehensive data for city planning, workforce development, industry assessments, even transportation infrastructure planning, health assessments. Like, it's a holistic thing, right? More and more natural disaster risk, right? To become more resilient in the face of these kinds of risks. By making the data available, and we do it on a sliding scale so that it's very accessible to smaller communities that otherwise would never be able to even afford like hiring a data scientist, right? And to use Statebook, other companies like Esri, right, is probably the best in class GIS mapping and data company in the world. But that you do have to hire data scientists to use that, right? And it's expensive and it's very hard to use. It's very, very technical. Versus at Statebook, our specialty has been, again, going back to that journalism background of making a lot of information really accessible to a broad audience. We've made our platform very user friendly, very accessible. You do not have to be a data scientist or technical to
The data are you okay?
I'm okay. Yeah, you're good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just paused for a second.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you don't have to be technical to use our data, and you can just very easily come in and look at a map or look at a chart or a table, and it is very, again, user friendly. So that helps democratize the data across these smaller communities that otherwise wouldn't have access to it, would rely on like a university, which creates a bottleneck to get the data for their community. And even then, nobody else has the full holistic view of data across any region in the US that Statebook provides. So I guess that's actually one more thing that I would say about this is that industry norms, rightly or wrongly, put a lot of pressure on even small rural communities to constantly be looking for the next Fortune 500 company so that the mayor or the governor or whatever can announce, new jobs. They often don't have the workforce or the infrastructure to support that, right? And so they spend a lot of money unnecessarily trying to attract these companies that can never come to their region. Right. Or if they did, they would fail, right? Because they wouldn't have the needed support structures.
They can't support it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so having access to data like what we provide for those smaller communities really enables them to do a more realistic assessment of what's possible and potentially start by growing the industries that they already have, and then over time growing the workforce, developing the infrastructure that could specialize in a particular industry or across industries, or support larger industries that may be located in the larger city that is in the region, right? And can then they can create their niche there. So I think that's another way that we help democratize that data.
That's awesome. Can you share a story with us about, a smaller jurisdiction doing that, or is that kind of private for you guys? No.
Well, all of the corporate site selection work that we've done is pretty private. We have to sign NDAs. We can't talk about it.
Yep.
I think Amazon, when Amazon used us for HQ2, that was an exception. They allowed us to talk about it, but they didn't allow us to do any press about it. So it was kind of a conundrum thing. But actually, that is a really good example, the Amazon HQ2 project. I mean, I know it's kind of old news at this point, but it is still to this day one of the biggest, most public site selection projects that ever happened in this country. And one of the really interesting pieces was that communities had to join regionally, like join forces regionally to be able to compete for that project. And what ended up happening is that even though the federal government for a long time has been trying to encourage smaller communities to join together regionally to create, these kind of hubs, Amazon kind of forced them to do that. And by using data like ours, both on the economic development organization side, and Amazon was actually using it for the project, what ended up happening is that even those smaller communities that of course couldn't really compete for an HQ2, they ended up winning a ton of business from Amazon on the back end, not HQ2, but warehouses, distribution centers, etc., because then Amazon had the information on what those communities could support, even if it wasn't HQ. That is a really interesting kind of use case, I think. And I guess one more interesting one is that one community, when they first got access to Statebook, they ended up using it to identify their top 10 cities that they competed with. This was a very small rural community. And they were able to see, like, here's how we compete with these top 10 cities that we, when we get an RFP, we know these are the groups that we compete with, the areas. And then they were able to kind of position themselves to say, here are our strengths compared to these other locations, and here's what we're actually doing to address the weaknesses, right? And so they were able to evolve over time to be much more competitive because they had the insights of what their other competitor cities were doing.
It makes me love data, just to give them the ability to see all of that and then know how to address it. Or I think about the city that I grew up in and have been involved in economic development, and how we're near Seattle, right? I mean, we're I don't know, 30 miles south of Seattle. And so just thinking about how you support a workforce that still kind of, I mean, nobody likes to drive up north, if I'm being honest, but they don't need to, right? What can Tacoma do as a city to increase, the needs of the greater region is so important. And I think, Tacoma isn't super small. I think about how amazing all of that is, and giving you just that actionable insight.
Yeah.
It's very cool. So you're working with corporations, so it's so, what an amazing visibility you have now in seeing all of this and experiencing what the data is showing. So from the corporate end of things, like what are you seeing? What are some trends that you're seeing in site selection, and, what decisions they're making now versus, say, 10 years ago?
Yeah. Well, I think every site selection project is always driven by workforce first, right? And so that obviously has evolved with COVID and work from home and things like that. During COVID, of course, we know there was a big diaspora out of the cities. People then came back to the cities, but it was more young people looking for that community and really wanting in-person experiences because they're growing in their industries, right? And they need mentorship and they need community, versus people sort of mid and later career were like, we don't have to have this commute anymore. We can just, live out here and work from home and be productive and just come to the office when we do need to collaborate on something, and then we can meet with our team. So I think that diaspora really interestingly shifted a lot of things in corporate site selection and economic development, because smaller, more rural areas were able to start to position themselves as a quality of life location where workers could live and have a big yard and raise their kids, or, go hiking or have proximity to nature, versus being in a city. And I think it's still evolving, corporate site selection, as everybody's trying to figure out what is that balance between requiring workers to be in the office versus allowing them to work remotely. How do we make space more efficient, and how do we optimize it for these kinds of collaborative spaces, as opposed to, worker bee cubicles, when they could do that kind of work at home in many cases. But I think the other really interesting shift in corporate site selection on a more macro scale has been analyzing risk. So 10 years ago, I did a presentation to FEMA, HUD, and Fannie Mae on this, at the time, new technology for identifying flood risk and wildfire and things like that. And they were blown away by it because it was much more technical and detailed in its analysis than anything that FEMA had at the time. Well, still, actually.
Yeah.
But we couldn't give that technology away to corporations. And they were only charging about $10,000 for a report that would look 15 and 30 years out at a particular property, a parcel or a building, and say, like, here's your flood risk today, 15 years out, 30 years out. And companies would look at that and they found it fascinating, but they were like, oh, we can't justify spending $10,000 on that. And I was like, you're making like a $300 million decision and you can't spend $10,000 on a risk analysis, right? And they literally couldn't justify it, weren't interested. They were like, well, we don't even know if we'll hold the property that long or whatever. And so today, with escalating natural disaster risk, and I guess it's twofold, right? It's increasing frequency and increasing impact, right, of natural disaster risk. And there really is no place in the country that is a climate haven, right? Asheville, North Carolina was a climate haven. The Catskill Mountains, where I spend a lot of time, was a climate haven. Hurricane Irene hit here, Hurricane Helene hit there, and just destroyed communities. And those were supposed to be areas that didn't get those kinds of disasters. We expect wildfires and earthquakes in Los Angeles, not to the extent that we have just seen them hit the wildfires, but there really is no place. And then you couple that with like cyber risk and terrorism, like the impact of global conflicts on supply chains and, all kinds of things. That risk assessment has really escalated in the consciousness of both companies and their insurance companies, right?
Sure.
So because they can't get insurance in certain locations unless they have, they are prepared, they are looking now at communities not to assess as much even the risk, because the risk is kind of ubiquitous now, no matter where you locate, but they're looking to assess what structures have you put in place in your community to be able to respond quickly and recover quickly, and, really mitigate any kind of business interruption. And so that's where I think the biggest shift has come in.
Fascinating. So this is not nearly like what has been experienced out there with the wildfires and everything, but we just this week had an alert on we were going to get crazy hail. And it was supposedly going to be, the size of golf balls or bigger or whatever. And so everyone went out and covered their cars. And growing up, we never were concerned about that. Well, it turned out to be a false alarm. But, besides rising waters, what are you seeing on the West Coast for wildfires? I'm curious just what else you're seeing
for
West Coast.
I think you get those atmospheric rivers, right? That was never a thing before.
Yeah.
There's always earthquake risk, wildfire,
Hmm.
right? So I
Yeah.
think these shifts in natural disaster risk have just been increasing. And at Statebook, we brought in the FEMA National Risk Index, which identifies different hazard risks for every community across the country at the census tract level. So it's like neighborhood level. And then we developed our own visualizations around that so that you can go in at a glance and see here's the risk for wildfire. Or actually, you can go and look at the risk for buildings, population, and
Hmm.
agriculture. And then you can also see the community's resilience level, like what have they put in place, how prepared are they, and then their
Yeah.
vulnerability level. So it's very easy to like assess. Here's, in LA, for example, they're recovering from the wildfires now, but they're as part of that process, they're putting in place the resilience measures to be able to respond better to future wildfires and more importantly, even for them, to respond to a massive earthquake, which is overdue for that region, right? And
Yeah.
so, there's a lot of communication structures, infrastructure, etc., that you can put in a community to be able to solve for all of these different risks and be able to again recover, and then build resilience as you go forward.
So, do you advise on that as a company on how to build the resilience piece, or
So
you're just supplying the data?
we don't advise. We're like the data company. But so we
Sure.
provide the information, and then, a community would hire a consulting group or something like that to do that part of it. But we've partnered with the Institute for Sustainable Development, with the International Sustainable Resilience Center, very large national and international nonprofits that do that kind of advising, and they use
Hmm.
our data as part of the inputs for that so that they have a very
Okay.
data driven perspective on it. And with the International Sustainable Resilience Center, we built something called the Economic Resilience Scorecard. So they
Hmm.
actually developed it working through their work with the United Nations, the World Bank, the World Association for Public Private Partnerships. They do a lot of work with those large global entities, and they do a lot of resilience consulting, in Japan for nuclear explosions or earthquakes, or they've done a lot so around the world. So they, with their expertise, developed this sort of 50 question framework
Hmm.
to provide a score to communities. And when I saw it, I said, A, this is brilliant. Everybody needs it. Communities need it
Hmm.
to get prepared. Companies need it to be able to assess where a community is and how much they have put in place to solve for business interruption. And I said, as a consulting group, you can't go community by community trying to roll this out. Let's digitize it and
Hmm.
let's develop a framework around each question as part of the scorecard so that communities have a step by step framework that they can use to increase their resilience across. It's not just natural disaster, it covers natural disasters, cyber, terrorism, there's all a pandemic, there's all of these risk factors that this assessment covers. And so it becomes like a tool that they can use both to meet federal requirements for economic resilience. In order to get grant funding, they have to have certain resilience measures in place. And then it also gives them the talking points that they need when they're talking to companies to say, here's why you should locate here, here's how prepared we are.
So important and amazing. What a fun experience you're having seeing all of this and meeting all these people. And I love it so much. It's awesome.
Thank you. Me too.
Yeah. So, okay. I mean, obviously, everybody's talking about AI, right? And okay, so how long has Statebook been in
Since
business?
2014.
Okay, so yeah, you guys are just in the thick of it as a business. So how is AI, going to change what you're doing? How do you see it changing kind of the bigger, all of this economic development data? What's next with AI?
It's a great question. I will say nobody knows, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I read this morning that Apple is putting together a new health platform, not to just,
I did
did
too.
you see that? Yeah, to actually replace
I
your
did.
doctor, right? Which is something that
Yeah.
IBM tried to do with, I forget the name of the technology, the one that won on Jeopardy years ago. It was sort of,
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
yeah,
Like just the
Watson.
supercomputer crazy.
Yeah, Watson,
Watson, that's right.
IBM Watson.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So, health was the big vertical that they were going to go into with AI as well. But, I think AI is still kind of the Wild West, and there is no off the shelf AI product yet that can really work with data really well. It still hallucinates too much of the time. And when ChatGPT first became a thing, right, a couple of years ago, we were partnering with an AI company that wanted to build our data into their AI systems. And they weren't really into corporate site selection as much. But after talking with us, they realized that was a really interesting vertical. And they put up a whole case study on their website about how they could help companies with corporate site selection using AI. And they had a whole case study of like, if this kind of company were looking to locate, here's where they would locate based on all of the different data points. And they listed all the data points, the actual data in the case study, why this community would be a good fit. And immediately I was like, oh my God, can they really do that already? And are we going to go out of business because AI can just be a magic wand, right? And
Yeah.
so I sent the case study to my chief economist, and he sent it back redlined. And it was very articulate. It was very compelling. It looked like it would be an amazing solution. But every single data point without exception was wrong. And some of it was like 2% wrong, and some was like 350% wrong. And I sent it on to this AI company, and I said, you're asking a company to make a $350 million or whatever decision on a location and building facilities and bringing workforce there and everything. And every single data point is wrong. And all of it was sourced with a link, half of which was hallucinated, the other half of which was still incorrect, right? So it's evolved dramatically, obviously, over the last 2 years. And now they're starting to come out with AI that can do some math and starting, not yet accurately, to be able to do forecasting. So off-the-shelf AI solutions for economic development and site selection don't yet exist.
Yeah.
And I think the scary part is that it is so articulate that people get fooled because they don't have access to the data, the actual data, to be able to check it against. So the one thing that we always caution our customers against is like, check the data. Don't just assume that the AI is giving you the right answer, because at least half the time, if not more, it's hallucinating. I think on the bright future side, I think we will get there. And I also think, we can train AI to do new and different, provide new and different kinds of solution using data. I have recently, I chair the Cornet PropTech Committee, as you know.
Yes.
And we are in the process of doing a whole AI series now for real estate, AI for real estate. And we brought in Josh Panknin from Columbia University to speak at the first one. And his message really was very important, I think, for real estate, in that there is no magic wand, and industries like real estate, right, they tend to just want a solution that's magic out of the box, and it doesn't work that way. It requires understanding the questions you want to answer, understanding if you can actually get the data to answer those questions, and then training an AI model exhaustively over years with a lot of resources and investment to see if you can do that thing, right? And oftentimes you fail and you fail and you fail, and then you might get to some solutions that ultimately work. So, do I think that AI will play a huge role in all of this? Yes, absolutely. I just think we're not there yet with an off the shelf solution. So, having qualified all of that, we are now partnering with a couple of different AI groups to see how they can build our data into some of their solutions. And we're even exploring integrating with some of the existing chats, the large language models that would be able to answer questions based on our data. But of course, it still
Right.
requires a lot of training, even helping the AI identify what the geography is that somebody's actually asking for, because city names are so redundant, for example, across states, and like
Sure.
just that one little piece is really complicated. So there's a lot of work to do, but I do think we'll get there with some very, you know, incredible and exciting solutions over time.
It is. It's just, it's going to take humans to do it. I think
Exactly.
that's, especially in industries like construction, architecture, engineering, and real
Yes.
estate. So I think, and the thing is when you are ingrained in that industry doing a certain role that has sort of always existed, or at least has for the last, 100 years or whatever, it's like the willingness for someone to jump out of that expertise and then start something new. I feel it doesn't, people aren't doing it, they're just not.
Yeah.
So I think for those of us, and that's part of why I really wanted to be more involved with the prop tech and what you're working on, because it is so important. I mean, I think I interviewed Brett Ernest with Suffolk a couple weeks ago for the podcast, and he was like, we have to do this.
Yeah.
Like we really don't have an option not to.
Yeah.
Suffolk is, obviously investing huge amounts in creating, using the data to help us builders. It because it's gotten so expensive, and there are just so many reasons. So yeah,
Yeah, I would say one of the other things that's come out of some of these discussions at Cornet and other places, I sit on the International Advisory Board for CU Boulder's Clump Center for Real Estate as well, and we just did an AI for real estate session as part of their annual forum a month ago. And obviously the dialogue is happening across the real estate industry, right? And what I think is one of the points that was raised at that event was, we've invested billions and hundreds of billions of dollars, right, in AI for real estate. And what do we have to show for it today? Like very little, actually. And part of that is that, investors who do not understand AI actually and what it is, their first
yeah.
question to a prop tech company is, well, what's your AI strategy, right? And if they really understood AI and they really understood how to apply it to companies and solutions, right? They would reframe that question to be much more targeted and direct. Like, how do you plan to embrace AI, and how can it help you leverage your solutions, or can it even? And if you think it can, how much would you need to raise to accomplish that, and how much time would it take, right? And instead, every prop tech company has to have AI in their name, or as a part of their solution, when it's not really AI, and they would have to raise so much more money to actually accomplish what is being
Yes,
asked. And what
that's
happens
right.
then is that the customer, right, the actual customer of PropTech, whether it's a head of real estate or a big large commercial real estate firm, or an investor or developer, right, they think that AI can get them here, but it can't. And so then they're constantly like, we wonder why real estate is one of the last industries to adopt technology. And in large part, it's because a lot of the prop tech can't actually deliver what the customer thinks it can. And then it doesn't work, right? So, and I mean, some
Yeah.
of it does, and it's very valuable, right? Which is why we have a prop tech committee. But it's is tricky to evaluate, and neither the investors, in most cases, Six Sigma is doing a huge amount of investing in understanding AI and bringing in experts as a hedge fund focused on real estate. There are other investors that are doing that work, but very few of them are actually doing that kind of real in-depth understanding of what it is. And so because neither the customer nor the investors understand AI, how can they evaluate the solutions at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. We actually ended up doing Idifico AI because the domain name was way less expensive than the idifico.com.
That's great.
And I definitely intend to integrate AI.
Yeah.
I mean, I have lots of ideas, and I am one of those humans who's willing to put the time
Yeah.
in with the AI to make it work. So, that does exist, but especially our CTO, she was like, I just want to be clear here that we're going to use
Yeah.
AI, but we don't currently
Yeah.
use it, so. And I'm comfortable saying that, I'm not trying to pretend to be something we're not.
Yeah.
It's just, $300 for the dome versus I think it was something crazy like 25 grand or something,
Well, it's a
It's
great
just like,
name.
well, yeah, well, yes, we put a lot of time and thought into it, and people were like, well, I don't know how to say it, and I'm like, well, people can
Yes.
learn. Okay, so let's see. So we are getting close to time. Do you have an extra 5 minutes,
I can do an extra
are you?
5. Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. Economic development and corporate real estate have relied on large intermediaries like global consulting firms and service providers, right? So do you see, tech like, maybe providing solutions that consulting firms are currently providing, or do you think that, we're still going to be very human centric for the next 10 years?
So I think it's a combined answer, honestly. I think it's both. Investors get very disappointed when they find out how much of Statebook's back-end technology relies on our chief economist, our data developers, et cetera, cleaning and manually examining data, right? And yes,
Yeah.
we have used technology as we've learned through human processes. We have developed technology to scale that as efficiently as possible, right? And leveraging APIs and developing our own APIs and things like that. But I think that it's always going to be a combination. And will technologies like AI and so forth, will they change the world? Yes, right? And I think it's happening in front of our eyes in ways that we don't even realize every day, right? I mean,
Right.
the fun example is like when you need to get somewhere, what do? You go to Google Maps or Apple Maps, right? And you put in an address and you figure out how to get there and it tells you, right? That's AI, right? And we don't even think of it that way. So I think it's permeating our experience, our everyday experience in ways that we don't even realize. We just sort of take it for granted. And I think in business, it's the same thing, right? We're going to see a lot of that exponentially increasing faster and faster, but it will always be a combination of human and technology. It's not going to just replace it so we can all just go get our nails done and sit on the beach drinking Mai Tais, right? It's just, it's a combination, and it find it very exciting as opposed to threatening, because it's always an opportunity for innovation. And how can we do that as humans? What's the next thing we're going to create with this new technology? Not like, oh my God, my job's going to go away,
Right. Same. I'm totally with you there. So last question, and I'm just very curious about this. Just tell us about leading Statebook. Tell us about leading your team and the vision. And you've held on to this vision for so long, and it keeps evolving and getting better and wonderful. So just tell us about that experience leading this company.
Well, first of all, I am incredibly fortunate to have the team that I have. My core team has been with us on the tech side since like 2017 or 18, and my chief economist, my director of operations since we launched or pre-launch. And so my core team is just incredible, and I could never do what the company has done. We could not have accomplished it without each of us kind of having complementary skills and being able to come together and both innovate together and then also work independently. And I think my personal specialty is really going out into the industry and listening and assessing and understanding where the next evolution of the technology needs to happen. So, for example, we just in the last month added incredible data for both energy transformation, so all of the power plants and energy generation by source and capacity and so forth technology, and then all of the alternative fuel stations. We're in the process of adding all the substations and mapping where electric power lines actually run, and then overlaying that with things like natural disaster risk and industries and poverty and, all kinds of stuff. And so, as part of the energy transformation and the fact that, this came from listening to big utilities talk about how brownouts and energy capacity is going to start becoming a household conversation, a dinner table conversation, as AI and data centers require more and more and more power. And at the same time, we've been retiring petroleum-based and coal-based power plants faster than we can spin them up. Spin up, new alternative, cleaner types of energy. So it really is like it's another moment in time that most people still don't realize that we're engaged in, but as their medical devices stop working or they can't get their favorite TV show because there's a brownout, right, it will start to impact people more and more. And so, I think in terms of leading the company, it's always looking at what's the next thing and getting ahead of that and adding the data and the tools that we need to be able to accomplish that.
So important. Absolutely. So it always just cuts us off when it's time to go. I guess we did it. We did it right in the right amount of time. Anything else that you'd like to share? I see a puppy back there.
I know, my dog Jazzy just came
Hi,
up.
little buddy.
He's a 100-pound Bernedoodle, one of the big ones.
I love it. We have a Wheaton poodle.
Those are
so she's about 35 pounds.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, she was here earlier, and I'm like, don't jump up, but it is what it is. But anyway, Calandra, thank you so much for joining and sharing so much. You've been so successful, and I look up to you for everything you've accomplished. And I'm really grateful to have had this time with you. So.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Mandy.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I'll see you soon.
Okay.
Take care.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.
Bye.